On today's episode of Stupid Things Atheists Say, we're going to talk about if you need religion to be a good person, you're a bad person. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. To begin with just a few simple disclaimers. First off, nothing I say means that I think all atheists are stupid or idiots or anything. There are intelligent atheists who actually think in some reasonable fashion. And if you want a good example, check out Zarathustra's Serpent, who's got a YouTube channel. Smart guy. Had him on my channel for some really good conversations. Puts out stuff that's worth paying attention to. So there's an example. And also, I am not in any way saying that all atheists say any particular thing here. It's just a thing that I've seen a bunch. This one actually was, the exact form of this was recommended by a viewer. I've seen variations of this, because it's essentially the flip side of the you don't need religion to be a good person thing. And to some degree, it's also related to the whole, you don't need meaning, life can have the meaning that you give it idea. They're all related to each other because it seems to stem from this bizarre inability to understand that ethics and meaning are related to each other. Because if to take a really simple example of this, and I don't want to belabor this because I've talked about this in other videos, but if a living human being doesn't mean something different than a corpse does, they mean the same thing, then turning the one into the other can't be bad. And so it's only bad because a corpse does actually have a different meaning than a living human being does. And this goes through everything. I mean, the nature of ethics, to have a rational ethics, has to be based upon the nature of the things involved. And in order to have a nature, you must have been given this nature. As a contingent being, you must be given this nature by whatever gave you your being. If you don't actually have this meaning, then there's no ethics that follows in a completely meaningless environment. So this idea that comes up, though, and you see this, there are a bunch of, a surprising number, it should be surprising, I suppose, maybe it shouldn't be surprising, number of atheists who will say roughly something to the effect of, you're good, I'm going to just translate rather than go to the particulars. There are a lot of variations on it. They're all rhetorical and they're all pretty wrong, and they all basically amount to you are good because you have instincts to be good, not because you rationally choose the good in the world. And you see various things put in support of it, statistics that are brought up about how it doesn't really matter what you believe, all people act the same, and these statistics are lacking in all sorts of ways. Who they're actually comparing, how true they are. They're often, very, very cherry-picked sorts of stuff. They invariably avoid confounders and so on. Anyway, so you'll see various statistics brought up like this. But the basic idea at its core is, roughly speaking, that it is normal for people to just instinctively be good and not be tempted to be bad. And that if you actually need to be told what is good, if your instincts do not just always unerringly lead you to be good, such that you are good without effort, then there is something wrong with you. And that's just so wrong. No, I mean, there is a vague instinct. It's got the slightest kernel of truth. And the slightest kernel of truth is that we're a fallen species. And so, yes, we should, in fact, always do everything correctly. Although an unfallen human being will do everything rationally. They just aren't going to be, they're not going to regard temptation in an inordinate fashion such that they're pulled away from what they rationally know to be good. But it's not like, all the feelings and instincts of an unfallen human being being reasonably, especially of one habituated to the good, being directed towards goodness is going to mean that they are not rationally engaged in choosing the good. So it's a really tiny little kernel of truth there. And in this fallen world, it's just idiotic. People are bad. People are really bad. People do very bad things all the time. And if you haven't seen it, look up the Milgram experiment. There are a number of psychological experiments that were actually really interesting. I mean, they're not without their faults, right? There are various ones, but like the ones where some people were the students were divided up into prison guards and people in prison, or the I can't remember the name of the one, but where people were administering electric shocks to people and would go to. Now the person was acting, but they go to great lengths and so on. These were all done in the aftermath of World War II, and people wonder, well, how could the Nazis be as evil as they were? And they started doing experiments to see, like, well, could Americans ever be that evil? And the answer is, like, obviously yes. Of course they can. The idea that there's something like special magic evil about the Nazis, that they weren't human beings who, and so the rest of us could never be tempted to be that evil. It's so stupid. Obviously, we can all be tempted to be very evil, and given the right temptation, a lot of people will give into that temptation and be really freaking evil. The idea, and this kind of gets to a lot of the internet atheists that you will see, because I'm primarily talking about internet atheists. They are fairly well-to-do, like middle class, upper middle class, some form of middle class at least. They're comfortable by historical standards. They are rich. They don't face temptation all that frequently because, like, most of their basic wants are all just sort of like automatically met with minimal effort. Their parents took care of them for a very long time. May still be for a lot of them on the internet. Atheists, they find older ones, but they do tend to be fairly young. The partially relates to the way that, like, atheism does not have a great retention rate. People just figure out that it's wrong pretty often. But anyway, in any event, like, they had their needs generally taken care of, and then in any way where they are now tends to be doing fairly decently by the historical standards of the world, such that, like, none of them particularly are really worried, like, where their next meal is coming from, and not the one after that or the one after that. There isn't, most of them are not in any sort of, immediate fear of death from violence and so on. So atheists in general tend to be pretty darn comfortable, and comfortable people don't really ever imagine themselves doing anything wrong because they don't foresee temptation. And a lot of the things they do wrong, they don't really see the consequences of, so they don't really think of themselves as doing those wrong things. Because people ordinarily will screw each other over all the time and then just don't see the consequences of screwing each other over. So, it's kind of a weird thing where what you have is basically comfortable people in happy circumstances who can't imagine, who don't really imagine these things ever changing, can't really imagine temptation, and therefore don't ever think they give into it. And then sort of pat themselves on the back for just being lucky. Or there's a variant of this, one I've seen, and to be fair, it's mostly rhetorical rather than thought out. Was it Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller? I don't know. I don't remember if it's him or not. It was credited to someone, but when something like this, when pointed out that like, atheism doesn't provide any reason whatever to not murder people, since after all, why does it matter the particular collection of the subatomic particles, since, like, everything else is just a meaningless epiphenomenon? Or the simpler, the sort of lower tier version of that, which is, since there's no consequences, if you can get away with murdering somebody, why not? It's not like you could go to hell for it or anything. So, like, what would prevent you from giving into that temptation? Those are basically the same sort of thing, just presented at different levels. And supposedly to counter that, somebody, maybe Penn Jillette, maybe not. I don't know. I kind of want to say yes, but I don't. Look it up if you are going to rely on that in any way, because I'm not certain of that. Said, I've already murdered the number of people I want to. 0. Okay, do you want a medal for your lack of ambition? Do you want us to pat you on the back and say good boy because, like, you have no ambition to kill people? Like, you're harmless. You're a harmless little sheep. Just 0 desire for anything that could involve that. Okay, I don't understand. And you see this a bunch. This whole, like, you're tempted to do something that would harm people. Like, what how low of a worm are you? How much of a non-entity are you that you've never faced any temptation to harm anybody? Like, you can't imagine any way in which your life could be better that involves harming others. Like, what on earth is going wrong with you that you have absolutely no ability to comprehend any version of reality in which you doing bad things could be, in that moment, pleasurable or good? It's kind of weird. Like, now, if you are habituated to the good, you will have a natural repugnance towards these things because of that habituation. Fair enough. And, in a rational consideration, if you have a rational framework whereby, for example, murder is bad, then you will, of course, also have that sort of, learned and rational repugnance to it, because you think, like, no, I'm not going to do such a thing because it would be bad. I'm supposed to love other human beings. God gave to me to love other human beings, and so that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I'm not going to entertain any sort of ideas in which hurting people, where I would hurt people for fun or profit or what have you, because that would be bad. So you're supposed to think this sort of thing, and it is true, you're supposed to think this often enough that you have a habituation towards it, so that you would have some sort of natural revulsion to it. But if you can't even imagine something in which you could perceive the upsides, you're just very, very unimaginative. I mean, you should be able to overcome this. This should not be, God willing, you're not like put in the, in the thing where the temptation is particularly vivid, because I mean, it wouldn't be hard to imagine being in a temptation where this is a particularly vivid temptation. I mean, just imagine that somebody, raped and murdered your child, if you have children. I'm guessing most of these atheists don't, but like, a beloved pet, or somebody who's just pointlessly cruel to you. That crying out, that feeling you have that cries out for vengeance, that there should be justice, that there should be a balance redressed against this person who has committed such evil. Like, just think about that for a moment, and you would have a situation in which you would want to harm another person in order to bring about that the justice that instinct of vengeance cries out for. It's not that hard, if you put a little bit of thought into this, to come up with scenarios in which you would be tempted to something. And now, suppose you're in a war. Suppose you're actually in a war. The soldiers in war can get tempted to all sorts of horrible things, where their survival is very much on the line in a wide variety of ways. And there's a reason why soldiers are so well known throughout history for doing so many terrible things, and that's because they're put in a position where they are tempted like people normally never aren't. So, yeah, I think the whole thing comes down to the sort of atheists we're talking about are extremely unimaginative people who live very, very comfortable lives in which they have never, and they're also very not self-reflective, because most of these people, the ones I've been able to, when I interact with them, I'm not, generally speaking, willing to believe that I'm talking to saints. I am not willing to believe that these are people who, in fact, just do the right thing all the time. I'm pretty sure in all the cases I've where I've interacted with these people for some real length of time, these are just extremely unreflective people who don't notice all of the harm that they cause and don't notice all that they do wrong, and just, essentially they just give themselves a pass on everything. So that's kind of another thing. It's its own subject for a different day. But that's kind of the other thing about it too. So is that going to be true of all of the people who say this? I don't know. I don't know it. I don't know it even in any of the cases in which I've suspected it. But I sure have suspected it on the basis of just the individuals, where they're rude and unpleasant and they're deeply intellectually inconsistent, and you point things out to them and they just don't care, and they give all the hallmarks of people who are not really very impressive when it comes to virtue, and yet they are very much willing to hold themselves up as examples of people who do nothing wrong. So, yeah, fun times. Anyway, yeah, this is another one. It's always interesting when you see any of the variations on this that amount to a person essentially implicitly claiming that they're perfect, and they'll never admit it if you point that out, like you're saying you're perfect. Like, no, but they're sort of functionally close enough in their minds to perfect. They do nothing that isn't instantly forgivable, and they don't do anything that needs improvement. Again, will they admit this if you're really putting it out that way? No, but this is literally what they're premising their argument on. So yeah. Oh man, this one's always whew. It's always a doozy when you see this one. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at. If you like this video, then clicking the like button, according to YouTube, will make them more likely to recommend it to others. If you know anyone who might get something out of this video, then it would be kind to share it with them, or just share it on social media in general. And if you'd like to see future videos of mine, you can subscribe. And if you're not in the habit of checking your subscriptions page regularly, then I suggest clicking the notification bell and setting that to always, because otherwise subscribing to a channel basically just sort of like gives YouTube a hint that maybe it should consider recommending these videos to you, possibly at some point, if they think so. It's a funny world we live in. God bless.